everyone, this is Saveda from Zephyr Lake Carmelite Mission. Today I wish to continue my series on the Dark Night by St. John of the Cross on this wonderful feast of St. Thomas the Apostle to the people of India. So happy feast day to all who are named after St. Thomas, and for all those who are St. Thomas Christians, it's a special day today. Well, today I'll be covering chapters 12 through 14 of Book 2 of the Dark Night. Oftentimes, we come to a point in our spiritual reading where we feel like it's much of what we read, some of it we've experienced, and some of it may just be information or knowledge that we are gaining, but we are yet to experience. But we know that by persevering in spiritual reading, when we do actually go through the dark night experiences, we will be able to benefit from what we have read from this wonderful saint, St. John of the Cross's work. So in this chapters, he still speaks on the first stanza of his poem on the soul, and he says that persons going through the dark night are experiencing similar purification as the souls experience purification in purgatory, except that in purgatory, the purification is by a material fire, whereas in this life on earth, a soul that perseveres in contemplative prayer experiences purification by a spiritual fire. And so throughout these next few chapters, he uses the metaphor of a log of wood that is on fire. And there are two effects. There is the cleansing effect, that is the illumination, and the illumination is compared to like the light of knowledge that is in the intellect. And the second that the cleansing does in the soul is enkindling of love in the soul. That is compared to the warmth that the log produces after it is transformed into the fire. So mystical wisdom and love are both infused into the soul as the soul goes through this transformation. And he uses many scripture passages, couple of them being the Lamentations of Jeremiah the prophet, and quote here chapter 1 verse 13, "He sent fire into my bones and instructed me." So here you can see that Jeremiah is going through a dark night that felt like his bones were on fire, but at the same time he knew God was instructing him. Those who go through this dark night are filled with the very wisdom of God himself. God gives the souls the understanding, his own understanding. The wisdom and understanding is communicated to us who are incapable and are limited. And so when we receive this communication, that's a gift from God, the way of this reception or the way we receive it is painful because of our limitedness. Until the soul is refined and becomes capable of tranquil reception of the inflow of God's love, when these communications happen, the soul will experience the dark night or the painfulness, the anguish, that as if God is absent. Going back to that analogy of the log of wood, the fire of divine love first prepares the soul, like how the fire prepares the wood, by drying it of imperfections before giving off heat. That is the warmth of love. He also quotes the David from the Psalms, Psalm 39, verse 3. David says, "My heart grew hot within me as a certain fire was enkindled while I was knowing." The intellect is infused with mystical knowledge, and the will is enkindled with fervent love. And he also speaks that the way or the divine knowledge or the mystical wisdom is communicated is in a hierarchical fashion. This is a doctrine. It's called as a celestial hierarchy doctrine of communication, God's communication. That is, we believe that the knowledge of God is at its highest clarity and intensity and purity with the angels and the spirits that are closest to him in the celestial hierarchy. And the knowledge is transferred to lower beings. And the example or the metaphor he uses here is like sunlight. So the passing through a stack of windows. And the window that is closest to the sun receives the light of the sun in its purest form, the most clear way. But as it passes from window to another window to the next window, you can see that the clarity is modified by each window that it passes through. And so he says, God's knowledge also becomes lower or further away in the hierarchical order. Further and lower in the hierarchical order, the fainter and less intense are the illuminations of God. So this is in chapter 12 of book 2. And he continues, this fire of contemplation gives both light of knowledge to the intellect and warmth or heat of love to the will. And sometimes the light in the intellect is more intense and the warmth of love is darkened, leaving the soul in dryness. At other times, the warmth of love is intense and the light in the intellect is darkened. And so, you can see there is this alternating between the darkness of the intellect and the darkness of the will. However, sometimes one is able to see, just like however, sometimes the light of love is more frequently intense, and the darkness of the intellect is more frequently experienced by these souls. And he gives later on in chapter 13 the reason for that. But at other times, the intellect is darkened and the warmth of love is enkindled. Most of the times it is that way, and sometimes it's the other way around. So again, he goes to the analogy of the fire and the log of wood. So sometimes we can see the light of the fire, but not feel the warmth of the fire. At other times, we may be able to feel the warmth of the fire, but not actually see the light of the fire. So we may not see and feel at the same time. So there is a time when we might only experience one aspect or the other. But there will be a certain point in this journey as we mature and go, not at the beginning stage, but at the more mature stage, when both the intellect is in light, illuminated with God's light, and also the will is enkindled with God's love, and both of them are together. So it produces the perfect union of the two, intellect and will. And anyway, in chapter 13 of book 2, he says, the warmth of love in the will is called the passion of love. It is not a free act of the person's will. It is, something that is passively produced in the soul, in the will. However, the will still remains free. Even when it's experiencing this passive affection of the will that comes from God, the will is still free. So that's the reason why often we experience more the warmth of love, and we don't experience as much the darkness of that warmth of love as we experience the darkness of the intellect. But sometimes both the light of knowledge in the intellect and the warmth of love in the will are experienced together. But again, this does not happen initially when the purgation of the intellect and will are still underway. Usually, the darkness of the intellect is felt more clearly and intensely than the dryness of the will. And for longer durations, we experience this. The reason St. John of the Cross says is because the passive purification of the will does not directly act on the will of the soul, because the will is always free. So the passions of the will don't need to be purged as completely as the intellect needs to be purged, because the passions can also be helpful for us to experience the impassioned love for God. That is a detached love, a pure love. And that's the reason the purification of the will is a little bit less intense than the purification of the intellect. The soul experiences anguish nonetheless and suffering, thinking it has lost God's love, especially at the beginning of the dark night. It really thinks it has lost God's love. It is only later on that the soul begins to experience the burning of love, just like how initially the log of wood does not give out light, does not give out warmth until the log of wood is first dried. Once it's dried, then it can give light and heat. These souls going through this dark night need to be assured that God still loves them, that God is close to them, God is not angry with them, and that they are still loved by Him. So this is more or less for confessors and spiritual directors, and also for souls to recognize what's going on in their soul when they experience these dark night. The soul experiences a longing for God with which is greater, strong, and stronger than ever before. And then he speaks of Saint Mary Magdalene, and he says how in the after Jesus' resurrection, Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb, and she's looking for Jesus with this kind of a longing and intensity, with strength, with courage. Luke chapter 7, verse 37 to 38. The longing of Mary Magdalene for Jesus, who she believed was locked up in the tomb, but we know Jesus was already risen, gave her that longing, gave her the strength and courage to go to the tomb, even though it was surrounded by guards. And souls like her are totally focused on seeking the beloved. And in their love, they believe that everyone is preoccupied in the seeking and loving of God. They don't realize that they might be the only one experiencing that. They think everybody is experiencing that. And also Song of Songs, chapters 3 and verse 2, chapter 5, verse 8, we hear the bride in Song of Songs thought everybody was searching for the bridegroom. And she speaks to them and she says, if you find him, please, let him know that I'm looking for him. She herself was searching for the bridegroom with such of ardent longing, she thought everybody was searching for the bridegroom. These souls have advanced in their spiritual purgation, and the souls, while they feel unworthy, still have the daring, strength, courage, and impatience to seek union with God. God favors these souls by cleansing them of all imperfections and habits to do with the temporal, natural, sensory, and even spiritual things, completely detaching them, and God weakens their natural inclinations of the soul for all these things and refines the soul and makes the soul as it will be in heaven, even while it's still on earth. The soul becomes more divine than human. So as we see in the first stanza of the poem, one dark night, fired with love's urgent longings, are the sheer grace. So that's why it is sheer grace, because it's God's gift. In chapter, I went out unseen, my house being now all still. So that's the first stanza. So in chapter 14, he concludes that to find the beloved, the soul has to go outside of itself. And it has to go in silence, in solitude, and alone. And the metaphor of going out of our house unseen, alone, to the goal, that is to be united with one's beloved, it goes when everyone is asleep. It refers to all the operations, the passions, and the appetites of the soul. All of that are quelled by this dark night experience. And when these are awake, when the intellect and all the passions and appetites of the soul, of the will, and of the memory, they are awake, they become a hindrance for the soul from receiving God's communication. So to depart from this house is true freedom, and then to be able to receive the supernatural goods of the union of love of God becomes possible. Natural activity is a hindrance, and natural ability is incapable of receiving God's communication. We need to be passive. The soul and its faculties receive this passively, this communication passively, for it is sheer grace. Only those who have tasted this grace can understand what this is. So oftentimes we may hear so many things, John of the Cross says, that might appear dense or hard to understand. But when we experience this, when we taste it, if we have read it, it will make, when we are going through that dark night, it will make more sense. And every word of John of the Cross will help to guide us, to make sure that we don't become too anguished, that we walk away from this gift, this sheer grace that God wishes to give us. And also to realize that it is not that we deserve it, we are unworthy recipients of this grace, and it is given to us by God's love. So with that, I would like to end today's video. I hope you have a wonderful 4th of July tomorrow, and have a wonderful feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel on July 16th. And I will be recording in a couple of weeks. I'll record the next video. Thank you for watching.